From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Beres here on a Tuesday. We've got a good show on tap for you. I invite you to join in the conversation as we're going to be getting more deeper into the issue of domestic violence. And of course, it's against this entire backdrop that we've been talking about for the last several weeks. It seems there's a new development every other day. Of course, we had the whole Ray Rice debacle. That, frankly, continues with some of the developments at the NFL level. And then, of course, Adrian Peterson. The difference there, one dealing with a spouse or a girlfriend. Adrian Peterson now talking about the issue involving his child and how the NFL handles it. But we're not so much just talking about NFL and if they're right or wrong in all this, but we're going to try to look at what's happening there and see if that's a reflection of our attitudes here. And I want to know what you think should be done in these cases. We're also going to show you a story that I did yesterday, which is just crazy about how innocents can be injured in these domestic violence skirmishes. There was a case yesterday where a woman in the domestic with her boyfriend, who is the father of her child. The child's there on a bed behind them. They get into it. She feels as though maybe she's being threatened. She pulls a gun. She ends up shooting the guy. Goes right through his groin, the bullet, right through him, and then hits the baby that's asleep over here right in the rear. Both of them have to go to the hospital, and it's lucky no one died. We'll show you that. We'll get into it. And then open up the phone lines at 737-7587 to just get the very latest take from you on how this should be handled and what you think. And we're going to talk about it with an expert, not just me. With us this morning is Pat Shea. She's the CEO of the YMCA here in Middle Tennessee in Nashville.
YWCA.
I mean, did I say YMCA?
That's okay.
I'm a member of the YMCA, but it's the YWCA, and that's why I said when she sat down, when we start this, for those of you, we've all heard of the YWCA, but give them a little primer on exactly, why you're in a position to be here to talk about domestic violence through the YWCA.
Sure. The YWCA has been around for 116 years.
Okay.
And our mission is really eliminating racism and empowering women. We do all kinds of things to help women move from safety to self-sufficiency. What we really want is all women to be safe and then find their way to be able to manage their own lives. So a huge part of our budget, half of my budget, is related to domestic violence services.
And when you say services, I mean safe houses, all this kind of stuff?
Everything. We start with a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week crisis line that we answer constantly, 4,000 to 5,000 calls a year from women and men who have questions. We have a 51-bed shelter that is full, unfortunately, almost every night. It is
full
almost
all the time.
Every single night. We did in excess of 16,000 nights of stay last year.
Wow.
400 children and women.
What's the average length of stay?
Probably about 30 days. Women come in and they can bring their kids under the age of 18, boys and girls, and they can stay for 45 days. It's really an opportunity for them to become safe and put a plan in place.
This is a safe location. I mean, it's
safe,
secret.
Confidential.
Media doesn't know, and if we did know, we wouldn't put it on the air. It's supposed to be so that the spouse can't find them.
Exactly. Right. So confidentiality is a big part of our security plans. We also have 20 transitional housing units, so 20 residential rental properties that we make available to women who really want to get out permanently but need more time to finish their education, get their job, get their kids in another school, and sort of develop a support system in a community so that when the YW pulls out, they can stay. We do a lot of community outreach. Probably we talk to over 10,000 adults and children every year about domestic violence, elder abuse, and other things.
And I know the YW and a lot of other organizations do that all the time.
Yes.
And yet it baffles me some of the attitudes we still see out there. It's as though people aren't listening. Or I don't know what the attitude, why some people respond to some of these cases we see at the NFL level and elsewhere. It's not just the NFL, but why?
Well, I would first start with it's a lack of knowledge.
How do you have a lack of knowledge on this? I mean, you have to be extraordinarily ignorant to have no knowledge of domestic violence. I mean, I don't get it. Where's the lack of knowledge? How does give me an excuse for the meatheads that miss this?
People don't understand how complex domestic violence is, so they don't get that it's not about you're hurting me, so I need to leave, or that it's not my fault. Those are the two things that I see constantly. Women go and judge other women and say, why didn't you leave him? Or how could you have done something so bad that he would need to hurt you? I was with an executive here in Nashville of a big healthcare company, and we were talking about a recent homicide, and his question to me was, what did she do to deserve that? So those two are examples of a complete lack of knowledge about the complexity of domestic violence.
Now that's more complex, but I wasn't really referring to that. I'm just talking about what appears to be, to some degree, the tolerance for the perpetrator. Okay, I think and it is more complex to understand the thinking of the victim when they're caught in this horrible cycle. And that, I understand your point. But the tolerance that appears to be there, certainly if you happen to be able to carry a football well and score a touchdown, which is ridiculous. But, you know, the tolerance for the act itself, for the person who does it, that's what I don't get. There's no gray area there. End of story. Violence, period. All right? You punch, you hit, you're wrong.
That's exactly correct.
You're wrong. I mean, who misses that?
Well, there's always the lunatic fringe in our society that don't, you know, comprehend it, want the attention, want to be shown on national television with Ray Rice jerseys on.
Yes, and you're right, and I like the way you phrase it, lunatic fringe, because that's exactly what it was. Now, I wonder, the case that's come up more recently with Adrian Peterson, the running back for the Vikings, and he's been reinstated. He's going to play this weekend after sitting out one game. There's a line, too. Now, Peterson and some others have said, well, look, I was disciplining my child the way I was disciplined as a child. And who knows, maybe he was whipped just as badly.
Yes.
And where is the line? And there's pictures of Peterson, the best running back in the league. And if you think for a second they're going to sit this guy because he can help them win, it's not going to happen. But where do you draw the line again? And I've asked this many a time on this program, between, you know, some people spanking or physical discipline is part of their way of life. And I think it can be okay in some instances, depending on how you do it. Where's the line? It's not supposed to hurt. It's not supposed to leave any marks. What's the line?
You know, I don't know that I could state that for the world. I'm probably not an expert in child abuse, but what I do know is his comment about that was how he was raised is a frequent comment we hear about domestic violence. A lot of men who abuse come back and say, that was how my father behaved.
That's all they knew.
That was what I saw happen to my grandmother. And so in solving the problem of domestic violence, retraining, re-educating folks about what is love, how to show affection, what's appropriate behavior, because we all go back to what we were taught. We all go back to what we learned as children if no one else gives us a new idea or a new concept. Chris Sanders spoke at the YW just recently.
Former Titan.
Former Titan, great man, just doing wonderful community service. And he talked about a situation with his sister being abused by a boyfriend. And when he pulled the boyfriend off, the boyfriend said, this is what I was taught to do. This was how I was taught to manage my woman. And so there's a lot of relearning that needs to happen in our society as it's related to domestic violence, abuse, and probably how we deal with children.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, we're going to open up the phone line, 737-7587. Your take on, and before we get to some of those calls, just the Ray Rice angle, and I wanted you to address the one aspect of it where we've heard after the fact that there have been some including women, who have said, well, listen, you know, this wouldn't have happened if she had not, I guess we've heard reports, spit on him first or lashed out with, you know, a punch herself initially. Whether she initiated it or not, does it matter? No,
it doesn't matter. And the typical domestic violence case looks just like the Ray Rice case. There is a disruption or a fight, and it doesn't matter who starts it, but he ended it. He has the physical power, and he is in control of that relationship. So what we saw on television is what's happening in homes across the United States. How it started, who started it is really not relevant. Nothing she did deserved that.
Okay, so it's a matter of who ends it, or because he was so much bigger and strong. I mean, you could almost say if it was the other way around, because we keep looking at the sexuality here, a man hitting a woman, okay, but just as easily if this had been a man and they had kind of just, you know, shoved each other a little bit, and then a woman had picked up a 2x4 and just cocked him across the head, boom. I mean, that would be
just as bad.
Just as bad, because domestic violence can go both ways, but we all know that it's women that are predominantly the victims.
Predominantly violence against women is perpetrated by men. And domestic violence is not rooted in violence. Domestic violence is rooted in control and power. So when you look at that relationship, who has the control, who has the power, and those are the ones that they're the batterers, the ones that are in control of the relationship. So frequently when the police go to a domestic violence situation, even here in Nashville, still. There's been mutual pushing and shoving, but the question is, who's running that show? Who is telling the other person how to be, how to act, what to do? And that's really why domestic violence is so complicated. One adult is controlling another adult, and what we talk a lot about is it's through violence, but there can be control in many other ways.
We'll get into that. But before we go to our first break, let's squeeze in a call or two as the lines are open. Your opinions as you can sound off on this, and we'll go to Scott. Scott, good morning.
Morning.
Hey, Scott, go ahead.
Well, not everybody comes from an abused family, that raises up to be someone who would hit a woman. I hit my wife about 10 years ago, and I regretted it to this day, But it's not just a hitting problem for a man. There's lots of people in other relationships that are passive-aggressive, and an aggressive person does not get along with a passive-aggressive person. And it's not a problem that'll ever be solved 100% other than what the woman on TV said. Everybody has to be educated about it.
That's right. That's exactly right. Education is the ultimate solution.
And Scott, how did you handle it then after the fact? I mean, I assume it hasn't happened since, but you just...
I was in the military, and I needed to take anger management classes. It's hard to drop your military persona when you get home.
Sure.
And so... and they can say they don't strike in the military these days, but that's incorrect. The whole place is just an abusive nightmare, and then you come home. I was raised perfect. I didn't have any abusive parents or anything. And when you're in the military, you come home, and it's hard to drop your abusive attitude, depending on what you do in the service.
Listen, interesting. Before we go to the break, I'm really glad you brought that point up. I was wondering, now I think we all know, if we've studied this at all, that domestic violence can span society as a whole,
Yes.
socioeconomic, all those.
That's exactly
Do you
right.
think there's anything to, what he says, that perhaps individuals that are working in a more violent or aggressive field, be it, military coming back from whatever training they have to deal with, or is there a higher incidence of domestic among, say, NFL football players because they basically work in a violent field? Do you think there's any link to that at all, one way or the other? Or is it probably, would you guess, about the same as it is for other occupations?
I think it's pretty much the same. We don't have real data that shows us that any one occupation, any one race, any one age is more likely to be a batterer. And, there's a lot of misunderstanding that things cause abuse that really are not connected. But we do know that 15 million children are witnessing domestic violence every day, and we know for certain that being part of a domestic violence situation as a child will increase the likelihood that you will experience it as an adult.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. On that note, we'll take a break. When we come back, if you're on hold, stay there. If you want to join in the conversation, the number is 737-7587. We're talking about domestic violence and a lot more to touch on some of these cases, and your thoughts on whether or not these football players should be playing. And, of course, they're all charged, the ones that are, and are innocent until proven guilty. But should there be, and I'll ask our guest as well, whether or not they should be playing while these cases are pending. We'll take a break and be back with more right after this.